So we want to welcome Penn State University.
Yes.
And we look forward to hearing you. And I'm going to hit this. And may I start?
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting us this lovely afternoon to discuss your company's negligence in creating a generation of support kids. My name is Lima Bamija, and today I am joined by
Angela Lamley
And Grace Hubbard.
and together we are GAL Advisory Group. Let's be honest, few of us have, really good relationships with our technology and our phone, but our kids are even more vulnerable. As we can see here in the Ipsos survey, only about 22% of the general public has a trust in social media companies. And you, TikTok, we have to address how you play a role in this distrust expanding. I recognize that parents and guardians experience a totally different version of the app when they experience the app, including societal influences and what exactly society is compared to the young users. Now, as the lines between social responsibility and business continues to blend, you can no longer operate in your business as though you exist in a bubble.
And this social issue has come to fruition in many ways, one case being seen on TikTok. As you know, TikTok is a social media platform where users share 30-second to 3-minute long videos of themselves. Some of these videos include dancing, get ready with me, day in the life, or other trending content. A trend recently has been the Sephora kids. These Sephora kids are children usually around ages of 8 to 10, seen ransacking stores, causing disruption, and using products that are essentially harmful to themselves. This is likely due to the content that they are consuming on TikTok. So this brings us to the question, is the behavior of these children the responsibility of their guardians solely, or is there another entity here that shares some of that responsibility? To answer this question, we'll first identify the problem, dive into a situational analysis, provide our recommendations, and conclude. So first, what is the problem here? We're seeing that the problem is a lack of trust between 3 key stakeholders: young users, guardians, and TikTok. As our lives offline and online are becoming increasingly intertwined, we're seeing online interactions affect moral reasoning as well as offline behaviors. So we're seeing this being caused by 2 tangible issues within TikTok. First is that TikTok's business operations are being misaligned with value creation to stakeholders. And secondly, there's a lack of communication to children's guardians, which is creating a gap between guardians' awareness and the content that young users are consuming. So next we'll dive into a situational analysis, which I'll pass off to Angela to start with.
Thanks, Grace. So looking at our situational analysis, we'll be building off the foundation of the trust equation. This is a framework in which businesses can establish trust with their stakeholders, and it states that trust comes from the sum of credibility, reliability, and intimacy divided by self-interest. So let's take a look into how this really shows itself in this context. When we look at credibility, we are really looking at the language that TikTok is using and whether or not TikTok knows what you're talking about. And so internally, do you have established definitions? Do you know what it means to safeguard young users' well-beings? And not only do you need to establish that within your own company, but it's really important that the public believes what TikTok is saying. Moving on to the second part of that equation, looking at reliability, this is really hinging on action-oriented proof. And so we have to be able to deliver on those promises and affirm the credibility that we have just established in some actionable way. The third part of our equation looks at intimacy. Now, in this context, that means building a relationship with your stakeholders. Do your users feel secure and are they experiencing positive interactions and influence on your app? And likewise, do their guardians feel secure having their children operate on your platform?
And so as Angela's talked on the numerator of the trust equation, it's important to see how this interacts with the legal environment. But looking at credibility, now it's important to note that as of recent, there's been many congressional hearings about the future operations of TikTok in general, your app. While this conversation is also happening, we also begin to recognize that there is not a national legislation that necessarily applies to how your business operates in the United States. And so states have begun to take things into their own hands. We'll be highlighting Arkansas, California, and Louisiana. So first, looking at Arkansas, in the past year, they passed a social media safety act, which essentially imposes an age restriction on social media. unless the app is focused on a short form of dancing, which is what your business module is. Moving on from Arkansas, we have California. Now, California in the past year has passed the age-appropriate design bill, essentially saying that for any social media company that wants to offer a product, a service, or even a feature for their young users under the age of 16, the highest level of privacy default setting must automatically be applied. This also states that the terms and conditions for these apps must also be in a plain language that a user under the age of 16 must be able to understand. And lastly, we're focusing on Louisiana. Now, Louisiana took the approach of parental consent, essentially saying that for any young users that want to be on any social media platform, or even having any online account, they require the parental consent. And this measure also allows parents to actually cancel any underlying contracts that their kids have already entered with these companies. And so as we can see here, due to the lack of centralized legislation, it's been said that TikTok doesn't even have its own credibility to operate within its own sense. And so what's TikTok trying to do to gain reliability as it's falling short within the credibility stance? In the past year, post the introduction of Arkansas, Louisiana, and California's bills, TikTok went ahead and rolled out in the March of 2023 a 1-hour daily limit for its young users. Following that, it also increased the privacy default setting for those under 16. As you can recognize here, TikTok is beginning to operate more on a reactive stance. And as we said, with the recent congressional hearings between the future of TikTok operation in the United States, they have begun highlighting and gaining some marketing campaigns to gather support for being able to keep the app available in the United States. As we noted here, the reliability is really being called into question. But what exactly are they highlighting in these campaigns? They're talking about the economic impact. Now, in the past year, TikTok was able to enable small business to be able to earn up to 15 billion United States dollars. And of this, we have our 7 million small businesses actually said they rely on your app for small business growth. And as we look into them, 70% of them said that they have an increased reach. And among these 90% that has the increased reach, 55% have stated they were able to reach the unreachable. Now, what exactly is the unreachable? The unreachable.
It's happening before. It's not
The unreachable is just
blinking on and off.
perfect. The unreachable is defined as a certain target market demographic that they would have not been otherwise been able to engage with without the help of influencers and internet personalities. Now, this brings us into a very interesting conversation of what exactly is your revenue model. At first glance, we're inclined to believe that you just operate as a social media app. But a special part of your business operation is tapping into the market of shop entertainment, which essentially brings entertainment and shopping basically into one platform to ensure your business will be able to compete with Amazon in the future. Now, we're going to be looking at 2 main financial streams that impacted the $16 billion revenue that you made in 2023, specifically advertisement and TikTok coins. Now, the advertising are the largest portion of your revenue generators. So in this version of the app, as soon as you land into the app, it's about a 5-second video that plays. And from that, TikTok generates most of their income. Following this, in the past year, TikTok introduced TikTok coins, which are essentially, your company introduced TikTok coins, which are essentially tokens that allows users like us to be able to purchase tokens to send to our favorite users. And when our favorite content creator go live, we're able to then send these tokens to them, and which they can eventually cash out. But your company takes 50% of that value for them to take that monetary value. And so this got us thinking about, where is your company headed? Now, in the later half of 2023, you introduced TikTok Shop, really honing in on the shop entertainment part of your business model. And this highlights that vendors can now sell third-party goods. And when they make this monetary transactions, you take 8% plus 30 cents per order before this vendor cashes out. Now, it's projected that this part of your financial model alone is projected to generate $17.5 billion US dollars. Now, at first glance, it's very important for us to note that all of these features are only available on the version of the app that is above 17 plus. And at first glance, we can say, wow, your company is doing a really great job of not monetizing the experience of young users. However, this has led us to believe that this is actually furthered your business operation in neglecting the experience of the young users. And so I'm going to be talking about who these users are.
And so looking past financials, there are a wide variety of stakeholders involved and affected by TikTok. We have to recognize that this is a larger societal problem. And so the society at large is being influenced, government and legislation that is trying to catch up to TikTok, and social media is influenced, as well as influencers who make a majority of their personal revenue from your app, and businesses and brands who also operate on your app. But in order to really help with that larger societal pressure, we need to address TikTok internally, as well as the young users that are on TikTok from the ages of 13 to 17 and their guardians. And by addressing that, we will be able to help solve that larger societal issue. So how do we address stakeholder value? Just like Lydia mentioned, we've currently isolated our young users away from the financial model of TikTok, but instead of treating them as equals without the right to be monetized, we can see that the weight is actually unequally balanced. And so what we really want to do is balance these scales out and treat our young users the same as our financial stakeholders. So how do we go about doing that? Looking at our young users, they should be able to safely enjoy TikTok at its core. This is what is stated on your mission statement, and this is also what is stated in your article regarding safety and young users on your platform. However, it is currently misaligned and your young users are being exposed to potentially harmful content, and the lack of defined standards internally is also inhibiting your action and being able to rectify the situation. When we take a look into the guardians of these young users, parental controls should be transparently and effectively communicated. And we recognize that these features do exist, but because they are unaware, they can't make those informed decisions and lack that empowerment. We also know that looking at the community at large, your mission is to deliver personalized joy and creativity to the community. But we've already seen the negative influence online spill into offline behavior, hence the Sephora Kids and why we are here today.
So to give a brief recap of the situational analysis, we touched on the legal, ethical, and financial environments. In the legal environment, we found that there was an uneven safety standard caused by a lack of centralized legislation. In the ethical environment, we found that there was stakeholder value was weighted unequally. And in the financial environment, we found that stakeholders that were not directly related to the revenue generating model of TikTok were being overlooked. So this brings us to our recommendations and how we recommend to move forward based on this situational analysis. We have two key recommendations here for you, really touching on those two key tangible issues we talked about earlier. First would be better defining codes of conduct within your company, and then also creating a weekly guardian report that would increase communication to those young users' guardians. To talk about the code of conduct, I'll pass it off to Angela.
So looking at our two-part solution, the first part is really touching on that tangible issue of how business operations are currently misaligned with value creation. Our proposed code of conduct is also really looking at that first part of the trust equation that looks at credibility. And so let's currently take a look into the community guidelines. Right now, there is no formal code of conduct governing users. Instead, it is a more suggestive version called community guidelines that are based upon 4 pillars. We're looking at removing violated content, age-restricting mature content, maintaining eligibility standards for the main feed in which users log into the For You page or FYP, and empowering the community by giving them access to resources that TikTok has available. However, although there is only one set of community guidelines, there are actually 3 different expectations in which user groups are held to. If we look to your far right, the brands actually operate off of a formal code of conduct. When we talk about brands, we are looking at businesses that run professional corporate accounts on your platform and not actually at social media influencers, although that is a job in which they have a lot of their personal revenue come from TikTok. And so a violation in this formal code of conduct involves an immediate disablement of new campaigns, of app features. You are no longer allowed to search for creators to promote those campaigns. And there is even a potential suspension of account or a permanent ban on business accounts. When we shift our attention to the community guidelines that govern users, we can see that the scope of violation is much smaller, and it is actually only limited to the video that may have caused this violation. What that means is that there is little to no curbing and accountability being held to persistent trends, or problematic influences, or problematic actions that are being taken on your platform. Now, while there is a strike system and 3 strikes does indicate a risk of permanent ban, these strikes expire after 90 days. So actually, when we dive a little bit deeper in, there is little to no risk of a permanent ban on any problematic account. And so the accountability just really is not that. So what do we want to do? We want to shift our focus away from community guidelines into developing a formal code of conduct. But the first thing we need to do is to define the purpose of such a document. We believe that TikTok should be committed to being an industry not only in the social media and digital space, but also in how you care for your users. And that is what we need to be building these documents off of. Now, looking at the foundation that we want to set for the code of conduct, we need to define what well-being really is. And so the definition that we have created is to uphold a standard in which users and guardians can interact with TikTok in a way that encourages positive influence and also empowers decision-making. When we look at potential consequences for violation, it is really important that we build a procedure that promotes education and improvement. But it's also crucial that we don't miss out on accountability so that we can see a downward trend in this type of behavior. And so we really need firm consequences. So how does it work? The first time that a user attempts to upload something that may trigger a violation, we will send them a warning notification as seen on the top right-hand corner. If they do decide to post this anyways, and the content does get flagged as a violation, they will be issued one strike and mandated to take a quiz. It is really important not only that our users abide by these standards, but that they know what they are there for, what we are protecting, and that TikTok really does care about the well-being of their users. If they fail this quiz, they move on to a temporary suspension of their account. 3 strikes results in an account ban, and while there is a potential for appeal for both the suspension and the ban, if our internal team finds that it did violate the code of conduct, we will move forward with procedure. So what is the effect? Looking at that first part of the equation of credibility, we have established that by unifying a definition and standard of well-being in which we will operate off of. And then moving on to action and reliability, we have built actionable solutions that are visible and accessible to the community.
So now that we've talked about defining these codes of conduct and how that will increase credibility and reliability, we'll move on to the weekly Guardian report, and Lydia will take that on.
And so as we noted earlier, there is a tangible issue in the sense that even the guardians on your app are experiencing a very different version of society and societal influences. We also recognize that the version that their young users are also using, the guardians are not aware of the content they are consuming. And so therefore, there's a lack of communication to the children's guardian. And to bridge that communication, we're actually proposing an implementation of a weekly Guardian report to build intimacy for a long-term partnership with TikTok, your company, and the guardians. And so what exactly is this weekly Guardian report? So this will be a model of TikTok's existing report for the creator's account, and will operate on the current guideline that your company has that for any users that's under the age of 17, for them to be able to be a user on the app, they must be linked to a parental account. And so what would the guardians be seeing when they are interacting with this Guardian report? First, I want to address the fact that we recognize that guardians are not aware of the content that the young users are consuming. And so we're bringing that to their forefront. The first part of this weekly Guardian report, because it's a trending hashtag that the account is interacting with. So for example, young user at 123 has been interacting with these hashtags these weeks. The second part of our weekly report was to bring it to the fact that we recognize that your company already has protective measures in place, including hourly time limits. And so we want to bring this to the forefront of the guardians as well. Recognize that you have these features in place. However, the lack of visibility is causing the guardians to question your credibility and your reliability in the experience for the young users to be able to safely experience the app. And so we want you to show the young guardians that you are actually looking out for the young users, and you are bringing to their forefront the amount of time that the young users are spending on the app on an average. Now, the last part of our weekly Guardian report is focusing on a call to action. As we said earlier, recognize that you already have these measures in place. You're taking the steps. However, lack of visibility is also a form of negligence if you're not promoting these features in your app. And so the last part of it actually includes an extra step that allows you to move forward to content preference. So for example, if a guardian is interacting with the report and sees that they are not a fan of the hashtag that their young users are interacting with, they can be able to go to the content preference moderation section that you already have within your app to be able to then make adjustments and mute those certain hashtags. In that same scope, we also want to build intimacy, not only with that one guardian, but also make a community as well. So if I have a suggestion that says, hey, young guardian, hey guardian, you have muted this fellow hashtag, but here are some other hashtags that fellow guardians are muted on the TikTok app. And when we put it all together, what does it look like? It looks like this. Let's talk about it. Hashtags. And so what is the effect of building this intimacy for both TikTok and the guardians? Guardians are now empowered with the information to understand the influence that's being circled on the young users' experience version of the app. And then this also puts your company in a better position to minimize future legislation regarding negligence of digital well-being. As we've seen throughout history, companies that take the proactive measure in ensuring that the digital well-being of their young users is always in the forefront of their mind tend to suffer a less harsher legislation when a centralized form is being put out. And then lastly, we want to ensure that this is a two-way communication that aids your company and bridging into the guardians that hopefully brings a safe experience so that the young users are having a safe and curated experience that they can enjoy and, according to you, providing joy while sparking creativity. And so I'll now pass it off to Grace to wrap us up on our trust equation.
Yes, so to tie this back into our trust equation, we are seeing that credibility is being increased through that unified definition of well-being in the code of conduct. We're also seeing that code of conduct increase reliability through actionable implementation. And then we're also seeing that intimacy is being increased through building up relationships with guardians in the weekly guardian report. But we can't forget about this self-interest part of the equation, so we'll talk about that now. So we are inviting TikTok to redefine self-interest from self-interest that is primarily focused on financial success to self-interest that is focused on value creation to all of their stakeholders. This includes young users, guardians, and all other users. We believe that this can then not be a limiting factor to the equation, but instead increase the credibility, reliability, and intimacy that we built up earlier on in our recommendations. But how do we implement these recommendations? So the implementation of these recommendations is both immediate and long-term. In the immediate, we're seeing we can establish the code of conducts, and in the long term, we have a plan to implement the weekly guardian report. First, talking about the code of conduct, we are seeing that we are able to immediately act on this recommendation within the next 5 months because of its lack of dependency on external legislation or other institutional processes because it is internal within TikTok. Next, moving on to the long-term implementation, we are seeing a 3-year plan for the Guardian report to be released. In the first year, we're seeing a compiling of the database of young users and then building and developing an AI tracking algorithm to be able to automate the upload into this database of information. Then sorting the raw data of those hashtags, trends into implementable actions in the report, and then seeing the design of the email and the template that will be sent out to guardians in the 3rd year. It is key to note here that we will be able to start sending out this email closer to the beginning of the 3rd year once it has been created, and then update it as the 3rd year goes along until we have a finalized product with feedback at the end of that 3rd year. Within this graphic, we can also see that we have who is needed in the cost. Most of the cost of this project will be in labor costs and salaries to your employees, and we're seeing a total cost of $1.9 million. However, we do believe that this is a financially feasible option that will increase value to everyone involved, as TikTok currently is a $16.1 billion revenue just last year. So now, how have we rebuilt trust? To recap, we've used the code of conduct to make sure that business operations are aligned with value creation to stakeholders. And then we've also suggested implementing a weekly guardian report to increase the communication that is lacking to children's guardians, which will then decrease that gap between guardians' awareness and the content that young users are consuming. So thank you so much for hearing our recommendations today. We hope that we are able to help you implement these in the future, and we are now open to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And amazingly, you had 50 seconds left. You
Good
really
timing.
planned that very well. Let me do the next one that I need to do. I'll do it in a minute. So I liked much of what you said, but some of the words were very big picture and therefore hard to understand what really would happen. For example, the power of positive influence and empowers decision-making, that's pretty big.
Mhm.
And well-being, unclear what you had in mind with that. So if you could be a little more specific, that would be helpful, because big picture doesn't necessarily solve problems.
Sure. So when we look at well-being, we're really trying to have substantiate a difference between what safety is and what well-being is. So in this context, we view safety or cyber safety as really sort of the bare minimum of what TikTok should be doing as a tech giant and as the most prominent social media company out there. So when we talk about well-being, we're talking about not only minimizing those negative impacts that cybersecurity may have on our youth, but also in trying to enhance their autonomous decision-making, making sure they're not only surrounded by sort of an echo chamber, because that is something that they are really susceptible when looking at personalized feeds like TikTok. So we want to make sure that when we talk about well-being, it is just one step further than what cyber safety would be. So positive influence is not only, for example, getting rid of that monetization part, but it's implementing transparency with guardians, it is implementing that time restriction, it's all of those sort of actionable things that take it one step beyond safety.
Greg, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a lot of comments, but I'll just say a couple, and then if we have time, I can add more. But as a member of the leadership team, I gotta be frank with you. When you lead with that we're negligent, when your first sentence was saying we're negligent, that turned me off a bit. But I was having an open mind listening to you. But my biggest question is, what about the First Amendment? We're a platform that allows people to express themselves, and who are we to tell them where to draw the line? And why is it our responsibility if kids are doing silly things in a cosmetics store? I guess I don't really understand that whole Sephora kids thing. But also, isn't mischief part of the culture of being a kid? And don't we learn from other people's mistakes? So they see, like if you watch the Three Stooges when I was a kid, that might be banned on TikTok because they're hitting each other in the head with hammers, misbehaving. But it's still an art form and an expression that I believe should be protected by the First Amendment. So how do you balance those concerns of expression, freedom of expression?
Well, thank you for that question. I would like to point out that your fellow competitors have also taken that perspective. So if we look into the past legislation that's been brought against Facebook and Meta, as well as Instagram, they also took the perspective of, what are we hinging on the user's First Amendment rights? But we have to recognize that the role that your social media company plays is different than what it played 10 years ago. Your platform is replacing third spaces among many generations. And so this exists beyond just what the online space looks like. And so when we look at the power that your apps are currently having on offline spaces, it's very important that you must also take responsibility in those situations. And so if we look into the past legislation that was actually brought up against Facebook, Meta, Instagram, we saw that perspective actually led into them having a larger legal consequences in the future, and that actually halted and destroyed the trust they had already built with their ongoing consumer base. And when we look into the behavior of mischief, we have to understand that your platform is rewriting new societal norms. So what mischief was a couple years ago is not what it is today, due to the curated algorithm and the vast influence that your app is currently having. So for example, if we look at just the economic impact alone in terms of online and then offline spaces, you have content that is specifically curated to 10-year-olds that's given them suggestions of things they should do to destroy their skin. The issue here is that those conversations is not just staying on your platform. And because your platform encourages offline interactions with their brand partnerships and the ads that they run, then your young users are then taking you with the trust that they have, that they can actually go into these spaces and begin consuming the security you have out there.
And to build off Lydia's point, you notice that our solution actually does not have content moderation in that. So we're not actually trying to silence any voices that want to speak out on TikTok. All of that actually comes in with the Guardian report, and that is up to the parents. It's the same thing as if your parents allow you to watch the Disney Channel or the Nickelodeon channel. We are not in that business of content moderation. We just want to give parents the power to do what they want with their child and what they're consuming.
One more question, and then actually other judges chime in, but aren't you gonna drive children away from your platform if they're getting this sort of big brother email to their parents every week of Joey was looking at TikToks about whatever, something maybe something that's really private. Maybe the kid is curious about non-mainstream sexual norms or whatever. And so the children's own privacy interests might feel like that's being infringed by this, and then they'll go to another platform that's less sort of nannying over them to some extent. How do you prevent that from us losing customers with these changes?
So it's important to recognize that you currently already have those privacy policies in place. So the measures that we're bringing up that you currently have, these are already measures that you already have within your company. These are already information that you actually send out on an end of year kind of notifications. So at the end of the interaction, every young user gets kind of like an end of draft of the content they've been creating. However, what we're doing is just increasing the visibility of that draft that you already have. So it's not like you already don't have these privacy policies in place and these content moderation and ability to be able to suspend some of these hashtags. You already have those privacy policies there. The issue is that the parents are not aware of these policies you currently have. So this essentially be like a question to you as a company, if this is something that you were looking to possibly get rid of in the future. And as we've seen so far, the privacy policy you currently already have in your company has not turned away the young users. It's actually invited more young users because now they have been vastly introduced to new hashtags and even new communities, and they're actually even educating their guardians on. So these are the policies they already have in place.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, I got a similar question about why this is good for our business. Can you just speak a little bit more to why increasing credibility in this way with parents and the specific demographic would build better business? Because to me, it seems like already there are some constraints about monetizing younger users that you mentioned at the beginning. But then like, how much are they spending? Are you thinking that building this credibility is going to bring the parents onto the platform and they're going to spend money? Can you help me build that link between better business for us and the credibility that we're building with this particular population?
Sure. So to reiterate, the monetization platform on TikTok is already banned from the side of the company that operates on the 17 and under. So actually there is no money being spent on minors and on that side of TikTok. And so when we look at why this is good for business, it's because we've already sort of addressed the financial incentive. You have already addressed the financial incentive in taking that away from minors, but building trust and building visibility in what these children are consuming is really strengthening the ties between not only them, but their guardians. We can't forget that just because they're not on the app doesn't mean they are not stakeholders. These accounts are being linked under their guardians' emails, and ultimately it is under the guardian's discretion whether or not they have a TikTok account. And so we're really taking a broader view of what stakeholder means and not only limiting it to the scope of the user.
Is that, Sean, do you have anything you want to ask?
Yes, please. As you know, we're under scrutiny right now in Congress for the collection of personal data. And my problem with your presentation and your solutions is that by asking for guardians' emails, we're going to be collecting even more personal data. How do you deal with that on the political scene?
So currently, actually, every young user account under 17 is already linked to a Guardian account, so they already have that information. We would just be utilizing it to send out the Guardian reports so that they are able to increase awareness in the actions of their young users. So this is something that we already have in place. We're just, again, increasing that transparency, increasing that communication and openness, which would increase the trust. And I think that being under scrutiny is also a good thing to bring up, because through our recommendations, we are focusing on building up that public trust, building up that trust among stakeholders, which would in turn actually decrease the risk of public reputation or a negative public reputation or lack of trust amongst the community.
Okay, thank you for that. And a subsequent question is, you are assuming that all guardians have good intentions. You are assuming that all guardians are grown-ups. I mean, what stops me, an 11-year-old TikTok user, from just putting my girlfriend's name as a guardian?
Thank you for that question. So on the way that the TikTok business model currently works, it has a partnership with Google, and Google has a 3-step verification process that actually verifies the information on the accounts. So for example, if we're looking into the creation of false accounts, that would actually be us reaching out to our partnership with Google and checking that they're actually still following our code of conduct for our business. We have had our trust in Google in ensuring that when they are creating these new Gmail accounts, because that's the only way that accounts can actually be created on TikTok is through the Google Suite clouds and everything. And so when these accounts are being connected through Google, then that would be a moment for us to actually check our partnership with Google and ensure that if we're trusting you with our users and we're trusting you with the way that you're operating our business, if this is a possible concern, then maybe we need to reevaluate the partnership that we have with you if you're going to leave us in a place of blurry lines that actually causes more question and less clarity.
And once they link that account to a guardian or a guardian's email, we have to do everything in our power to make sure the space that they enter is as safe and well guarded as it can be, which is what our solution is also focusing on.
Thank you.
We talked a lot about the word ethics. And as I look at ethical, it simply says stakeholder value being addressed unequally. And I guess what I'm wondering is what makes this issue that you're discussing an ethical issue? What are the aspects that you're really looking at? No big picture, but right into the brain.
Sure. So let's start off with a definition of what ethics would mean in this context. So when we're looking at business ethics and TikTok, we need to make sure that the stakeholders trust each other. This means not stakeholders as a broad sort of term, but that the users and the parents trust what is being presented to them through content, through the platform, and all of the information that they are receiving. And because a part of our stakeholders, our young users, are actually minors, they are considered a part of a vulnerable group. And so it's really important to recognize that the content they receive and the content that they're consuming through these social media platforms is really affecting how they view moral reasoning, what their view on society is, developing decision-making skills. You can't leave them in an echo chamber and do nothing about it. And so when we look at why this is an ethics issue, it's because the partnership of responsibilities is now not only on the parent side, but it also has to do with every single entity that their children are interacting with.
Could you go a little bit more into the depths of beyond moral reasoning, where these specific ethics aspects are?
So for example, if we take the Sephora Kids case, we've seen a lot of public scrutiny surrounding the behaviors of these children. And then there's been a lot of finger pointing saying, you don't know how to parent your children, or is it the problem of the social media platform because they are showing these really negatively videos that could have negative undertones to them. And so when we look at that decision-making skill, it's important that the content we're feeding our young users is also being approved and transparently communicated to the parents.
And in addition to that, it's also the type of stylized curation storytelling that the young users are experiencing. So when the one thing to clarify is that the content that the young users are viewing on their For You page has to stay within a certain age group, as according to your algorithm. And so when they have these stylized cuts of like storytelling that has like quick snapshots of the content creator or the influencer going into the store, grabbing things and just walking out without the behind the scenes, the young users are more likely to, well, we actually saw the young users actually imitating that behavior without being aware of the transparency that actually goes behind the scenes. So the young users are not seeing the content creator going into the store, setting up the camera first, telling the cashier, hey, I'm gonna be doing a skip really quickly. Can you just, be a fan and help me with this content creation? The young users are not aware of that process. And so all they see is just a random person going into the store, grabbing something and walking out. And so there's that barrier that they don't have that information. And so what they do is they're now beginning to replicate such behaviors offline, which is now affecting the moral reasonings as this is like creating a new form of like societal contracts and like societal behaviors essentially.
Thank you.
Hey, I have another quick question. Are you, how much did you think about investing more in content moderation rather than thinking about the community guideline approach? Because the code of conduct community guideline approach has a little bit more discretion to it. It's sort of like putting out guidance that you're expecting users to follow. And then if they don't, there's more effort on you to kind of follow up and pull it down and give them strikes, etc. Versus couldn't you just more proactively invest in things like AI to support your content moderation to be sure that nothing is posted in the first place that impact this population? How much did you think about that concept instead of the community guidelines, and why did you land on the community guidelines instead?
Yeah, so I can actually take that. We touched on both of those processes itself. So this potential violation is the investment in AI. So this is something that you currently do not have on your platform. So this is a system that is currently in place in Meta, Instagram, and as well as Facebook. So it only flags the content before you even have the chance to even post it. So what we're saying is that like your fellow competitors have these procedures in place and they have these AI features already there. But one thing to recognize is because of your parent company and the stance that you currently have as TikTok US, the sourcing for these modules is going to take a little bit of a longer time compared to your competitors that are mainly established in the US. And so this is something that like we've actually recommended for you to do close forward. Now, in terms of taking more work and doing more work, we recognize that is a responsibility that we have to do because of the capacity and the influence that we have. And so because we do care about our users, this is something that we're willing to actually take into consideration to ensure that we're not just having a system that just constantly bans users, but also we're opening another platform, another stream of education. So they're very much aware with that interaction and how that plays. As we said, your influence doesn't just stay online. And so these are all measures that can actually affect the offline behavior. And so when we actually look into the second part of the code of conduct, so right now you have suggestive community guidelines that says, hey, you should not be posting, these are actual languages on your website that says, you should not be posting violent images. If you post violent images and we take it down, you may appeal within the next 24 hours. These are all suggestions because people are going to do this anyway. Appeal in 24 hours, get their 3 strikes, all within the span of 90 days and be back on that app. And so what we're saying is that this suggestive language is actually creating a very shaky foundation that does not even continue to even operate from a sense of accountability to even hold other users accountability. And so shifting to a code of conduct actually gives you more of a credibility and a steady foundation for you to not only operate on, but also set clear expectation, not only for your company internally, but also people that are looking to engage in the platform and even potential investors.
Thank you.
Any other questions by board members?
I think you answered all my questions. We're executive team, right? Leadership team.
Senior leadership. Oh, but I consider us board. We only have 2 more minutes before we go into the next phase. So if nobody has any more questions, I'll move into the next phase, which is we're no longer the executive team. We are the people we are, to give you feedback, to especially be of help with tomorrow's 10-minute and tomorrow's 90-second. So who would like to start first?
Although I loved your slides, I don't know that much about TikTok, but the look and feel of your slides resonated as like TikTok kind of branding, so I thought that was cool. Not everybody goes to that level of detail, and I thought you all were really great speakers. The one like thing, and I try to do this myself, is slow down. I noticed sometimes like Lydia, you were going pretty fast and it was almost hard to understand everything. And what else was I gonna say? Oh, Angela, I think you did a really good job of pausing and breathing, and that's something I need to work on in my own speaking. And that's great. And so I thought overall, great job is my feedback.
And how about either of you? Jessica or
Well, first, congratulations. I thought it was very interesting. I agree it was too fast. So I had, I really had to concentrate. So I would suggest going slower. I thought the overall ethical, how can I say it, ethical solution, ethical dilemma was not dealt with enough. Okay, I really needed you to go into TikTok's responsibility of creating some for kids. Does it create some for kids, or is it not responsible? I mean, you have to go into, I would say, what social media has as responsibilities today, and that's a very iffy background right now. Nobody knows. So I would add a little part on that, on why it is so why it is ethically responsible to establish this trust. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, also want to say nice job. I felt that you were really professional, good tone, professional dress, confidence. You know, it was clear bifurcation who was answering with the Q&A. So overall, really nice job on the basics of just presenting. I thought the slides were really well done. Attention grabbing at the start, which is always great. And just the visuals were really nice. I share some of the same cons of just probably the pace led to it a little bit, but kind of hard to like grasp what is the overarching storyline. So maybe start with like give that bottom line on top at the beginning, like give away, here's the overarching issue, here's what our solution is. We're going to tell you about how that makes sense from a legal, ethical business perspective, like frame up where we're going so we have a roadmap and know that you've kind of like resolved it. That would be my recommendation in terms of sequencing. I'll dig into the legal because I think the ethical and financial have sort of been touched on, and I'm a lawyer. So the legal side, I would just say there's probably some really interesting lawsuits that have been brought on this topic, and touching on that could be influential to me. Just seeing, the few states called out and sort of like how a couple states have thought about this was not as persuasive. So, to the extent about some lawsuits where it's actually like, hey, you influenced my kid to do X, or something that actually shows that there's been harm done to kids using this platform, I think that would be really influential. And then lastly, just because it's in your headline, I would say you didn't touch on the Sephora kids thing enough. Like it just went into kind of general kids on TikTok and trying to build that storyline of needing to write that with credibility, et cetera. So I don't know, maybe dig into it just a little bit for those of us who don't know exactly what Sephora Kids is. You touched on it for like a sentence or two, and a little bit more could make sense. Overall, really good job.
Thank you. I think you did a really good job too, but I can't stress enough how fast you were. And that meant that when you were so fast, the endings of your words were hard to understand exactly what you just said. Not always, but sometimes. You were pretty fast too, but so were you. because your content is really interesting, people try, really hard to hear it. Which wouldn't happen if it wasn't interesting. Tomorrow, it's really important that you think about, because part of the value of your talking so fast was part of your animation, part of your energy, all kinds of positive good things. But I think tomorrow, for you to be really effective in the 10-minute and the 90-second, is that you really need to figure out tonight how you can maintain the energy and the really positive vibes of wanting this to happen, but to understand that you are really talking to people who may not be able to absorb, and so then you defeat yourself. So I think that's important. The other thing, before I go into the 10-minute and the 90-second, the other thing is, I did think there was some vagueness around ethics, and that's why I tried to get a little bit more. So I'm sure you have ideas and thoughts about that. It's not that you're going to be creating a new talk tomorrow, but I think it would be a mistake if in the 10 minutes it was something that was big picture that would not help people gravitate into understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And so I think that thinking about a couple of things that are to the benefit of ethics, to the benefit of children, to the benefit of society, however you want to frame it. Even when I asked some questions, you were still thinking in the bigger picture, which I totally understand. But in 10 minutes, you can't cover everything, so that the points that you really want to get ahead, and it's about ethics, it's not, tomorrow isn't about anything else. So as you think about how you want to convey that, because technically you've been brought back to only talk about ethics, I would think about that, because you have a lot of content, and I just think you need to think about how you might move down to a more granular level when you think it's called for, so that nobody misunderstands what you're really trying to advocate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any concerns about your 90-second or your 10-minute that you might ask us about, that if we could be helpful, we would?
I guess my question would probably focus more on like the legality and how it informs like the ethical analysis. So a lot of the lawsuits that we looked at were actually focusing on what the definition of social media is and how there is no definitive term of social media. And so that's why like most of the lawsuits that we looked into hadn't really made it that far up or with any like ending verdict in there. And so with the waters being like very murky and a lot of definitions still being trying to be established, taking a stance through the trust side of that, is there another angle that we aren't seeing through the legal that we could possibly use to enhance why trust is an ethical issue and it's very important?
I just want to say that you were so clear in what you just said, and it was relaxing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Keep that in mind, because when you do that, it is actually more engaging than the fast. I think we probably do have some thoughts for you. Who's got some ideas about who's doing the 10-minute and who's doing the 90-second?
The two of us will be doing 10-minute.
You're doing the 90-second. My 2 cents is that I'm not sure the degree to which you need to worry about that. I think that you can come in on it from a different angle, which is you'll be talking to your colleagues. And the urgency of ethical behavior is not something that you need to go into the court type situations. You can think about what is it that makes you the angriest or makes you the most concerned about what's happening, that you agree because you're no longer part of the team tomorrow, you are an employee, that you become a catalyst for what it is you think is really something that we all need to agree, we all need to understand, and how can we not, whatever the language is you use, I think it's really important to make it highly, not personal to you, but personal to everyone, that nobody's able to step away from something like that. And I'm sure that Jessica and Sean and Gary have thoughts too.
Yeah, well, I don't really have a lot of insights on it, because I've never judged the 10-minute and 90-second, but I would say, obviously, you had a really thorough presentation here with the recommendations and everything, so you need to like more bullet points, I would guess, to shorten the time. Yeah, and on the 90-second, I mean, you just hit they should hit the sort of emotional aspect of it, the urgency, I don't know.
It's up to you which course you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there needs to be an impact after it, because that's how you persuade.
Thank you. If I could echo that question for 10 minutes as well. If there's any direction you wanted us to lean more, I know that we touched on diving deeper into sort of the tangible effects. Would there be anything else specifically for?
What do you want to accomplish in 10 minutes? The scenario, as you know, is that TikTok brought you back. They were interested enough that they did. And all they want to know about is the ethics. So you've got 10 minutes that doesn't need to have anything else laid down.
Mm-hmm.
But it's how you sell your idea by demonstrating what the value could be, what could happen, what needs to happen, whatever. I mean, you've probably been doing this for how many months or how many weeks?
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been involved in the research and all of that?
It's probably February.
Okay, so it's been a long time. And you have an abundance of knowledge. When you start thinking about putting yourself into the 10-minute and the 90-second based on their parameters, I have a feeling that there's something about the heart that comes out in that, where your heart felt, where it really matters, because you can't sell a company on something they don't want to do. Unless you come forth with some compelling reasons around something like this. And you can't get your teammates to shift if they don't understand what you're feeling and you understand. Not that you're going to be a drama queen, but although I've seen many of those that do that with colleagues, you'll know the best tempo of how you could engage people. Any other thoughts that the other judges have?
I have, just to build on what Jessica said with some legal examples. I would.
Tomorrow's all ethics.
Tomorrow's ethics. Tomorrow's 10 minutes is ethics.
Yes. For the 10 minutes, I thought you might want to check into what's going on with the European Union right now. And they've been investigating TikTok, and there's a lot of interesting information in that. So you could use that also as, legally something is wrong and something is happening.
But if you do that, it has to be, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying that the rules of it is ethics tomorrow.
Yeah.
They've only been brought back to talk about not legal, not anything else. So if you do that, you need to be framing it quickly. Well, you wouldn't be doing it. You would be needing to frame it quickly, because the time for that was in the full session, and you can't really repeat that if you somehow diminish whatever it is you're trying to say about ethics, because as you know, this is all about how we express ethics. So few things do that I'm reinforcing that that's, as you read it, that's, if your reading of it is different, then that's one thing, but the reading of this is extremely specific. It's, you've been called back by the company to give your full presentation. You've been called back by the company you gave your full presentation to for a second visit. They've asked you to speak only about the ethical aspects of the problem and to explain why your solution successfully handles any ethical issues. You have 10 minutes. There won't be Q&A, there won't be slides or video. You won't, you know the rest of it. So if you can fit in without the legal thing, what's happening in the world or something, that's different. Because I do think points, whoever is the judge will probably not be responsive to something that isn't sounding only ethics.
And then I don't know how much time we have left, but I have one more piece of feedback and I was hoping you'd be able to do it.
We have time, we have 5 minutes.
Okay. So I was wondering if you had any feedback on the trust equation part of that and like the foundation there, to see if you had any feedback on whether we should kind of continue to lean into that or maybe step away if you have any feedback.
What's your bottom line on the trust equation? Because that was something I also thought was more vague.
Okay, okay. Wait, so was that a question?
Yeah, that was a question.
Oh. I was like, wait. So essentially, we leaned into the trust equation because we first identified 3 different ethical problems. One being conflict of interest, trust being severed, and the scope of duty.
Trust being severed?
Severed. Is that?
Severed.
Yeah, severed. Sorry, a little Nigerian in the house.
Into what severed it? Are you going to, because you didn't do that with us, right? I mean,
So we try to express that through the
tangible
relationships.
Like the lack of communication with the guardians is making guardians want their kids away from TikTok. And the code of conduct is kind of posing, the lack of code of conduct has some sort of lack of clarity. So users are not exactly sure what the guidelines are when they're posting, because as the name suggests, this really is only like a guideline, and videos only get taken if it's been reported by somebody else. Like they don't have any measures in place. And so we wanted to lean into the trust equation itself because we established that TikTok as a whole essentially has lost trust within themselves as like their financial incentive is causing them to kind of overlook the under 17 experience, because the reason is, well, we're not making any money off of them, which is the right thing to do because we don't want to influence them to buy anything. And so we're just gonna focus and add like all these additional measures. Like they have their community guidance for the 17 plus version of the app was updated literally this morning. They get like the most recent updates. Privacy updates are updated monthly. But if you look at that version of the app for the under 17, their last update was actually last year of March 2023. And so because the reason is, well, so long as if we're not making money off of them, then there's no reason for us to be as proactive as we are compared to our financial stakeholders. And so that's mainly what informed us leading into the trust equation, because then TikTok in that sense is also violating, they're increasing the denominator, and the bigger self-interest is, the less credibility or reliability and intimacy matters.
you're selling to TikTok tomorrow at, in the 10-minute, and the goal would be that you would want it to be the kind of, I mean, no one will respond back to you except for those judges who are there to give you feedback. Just thinking about, okay, so there's a significant problem there. How would you, without demeaning a company that certainly has got huge issues, how could you, as the consultants, offer something better and more extensive than you had a chance to do today because you were doing some other things? Does that help?
Yeah.
I had one other thing that I don't know, it might be part of your 10-minute thing, and I should have said this when I was in character, but the the recommendation of implementing that parental weekly report or guardian's weekly report, I think you said it was gonna be basically a 3-year process. And in this, my shallow understanding of the tech/software industry is like 3 years is like a lifetime. So if they're gonna implement it, it'd be something that should be in months, probably not years. I don't know, but you might have put a lot of research into that, but I just thought 3 years was, gosh, that's a long time to put something in play in a software platform.
You actually have an answer to that.
Yeah, do you wanna
Can we share that answer? I'll do it. So, right now, in the tech industry, there's a big problem because they basically fed all of the AIs all that they can get. And so what they're facing right now is a huge barrier because number one, they're starting to now feed AI other AI stuff. And so a lot of startup companies that are starting up actually having to push back their starting plan because they need enough time to generate new content. And so when we look at that, that's also why in the huge framework right now, there's about a suggested 1 to 2 year delay in the tech boom of AI. So that was one of our so the second part of our AI reasoning was
It's IP, it's where you don't wanna build it off open source software, which is what a lot of other tech companies are doing, and that's why it is so quick.
Yeah.
But because TikTok is a private company that has already come under a lot of scrutiny for privacy, we want to make sure that we're building our own proprietary software, and IP protection is not available for that if we use open source as well as the privacy concerns.
And then
Yeah, that
to build your own AI algorithm too, it takes about a year to a year and a half. So we factored that into the 3 years there.
really feminine new like feminist technology that doesn't have the bodies that current systems have right now. So yeah, actually did a lot of research about that. So
All right.
I'm glad.
You know, I'm not a software engineer.
You did a really terrific job in a very difficult subject, and you should feel terrific about that. And I'm sure tomorrow will inspire you to do whatever you both feel for one and for how you feel for the other. Any parting words with our judges up on the wall?
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank
you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think you did a really good job.
Yeah.
And I appreciate